Okay, good morning, everybody. We are on the base. We are on 7B. Says it's on. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, very good. So you can send to the group. Okay, the last thing we said was we had Gufa Amarova on top of the page of Zayin base, 7B. Gufa 7B, top of the page. 7B1, yes. Gufa Amarova. Siche Chagabay Mavui. Yes.
Someone plans to sell a house, then 1 year.
Right, we learned about that. Certain cities, you have pending, you have 1 year to redeem it, or you have the whole time to redeem it. All those different halachot. Yes, that was in the parasha. Sukkah Taksir, yes. Yes, we had it before, right? We had it correct. Very good. Excellent. The Gemara says, if you have an alleyway, and the alleyway has there's two parallel walls, the wall on this side and the wall on this side. On the third side, you put a lechi, a post, a little tall 10 tefachim high board, but it's not even a tefach wide. We say that on Shabbat, it works for Shabbat. On a Torah level, it's considered a private domain for Shabbat. On a regular Shabbat, so therefore, on the Shabbat of Sukkah, you could put schach on that. You could put schach on that, and it would be kosher. So that's what we said, because since it's considered a private domain, or it's considered three walls for Shabbat, if they're parallel walls, and the third wall, you put a board there. So even though that board is not a tefach, but since it works for Shabbat, so that on the Shabbat of Sukkah, it would also work. On a regular day of Sukkot, which is not Shabbat, it doesn't work. You can't have a Sukkah with two parallel walls and a third wall that's less than a tefach. But on the Shabbat of Sukkah, since it works for Shabbat, it works for what? For Sukkah. Now, that was one halacha. The Amar Rava, and Rava said another halacha, Sichek hagabe pasti biro. If you went ahead and you put schach on top of the boards that were used for a well. What was the story with the well? The people be Ola Regel. Now Shavuot is coming. It's the time of we had the Beit HaMikdash. It was a special mitzvah to go to the Beit HaMikdash to bring korbanot, and people were thirsty. And if the Ola Regel, if it came out on Shabbat, if they were going to the Beit HaMikdash, so the well is a certain amount deep and is a certain amount wide. So the water in the well is considered, that area of the well where the water is located is considered a private domain. It has walls around it. It has width, which makes it a private domain. To take from the well out to the street, to take water and to take water from the well out into the street, that would be taking from private property to public property. The street is public property. So that would be going from Rishut HaYachid to Rishut HaRabim. So what did the rabbi, so they said the rabbis allowed a certain situation. If you make a certain type of structure, the rabbis allowed you to do it. And the rabbi said, you don't have to even make the typical 4 walls or 3 walls and to be a private property, which 3 walls, surround something with 3 walls is a lot. So rather, you just have to we can make 4 walls. Each wall has a board that's like an L. and each side of the L is this is let's say an amma this way and an amma this way. So you have like four corners. If you look at the picture in the Rashi, you have the Rashi picture. Look at the top of the page on 7b 7b1. See that Rashi there? Now that picture, by the way, I think is not could be better, because that picture does not place too much space between the boards of the corners and the middle, right? You see, it's very little open space. I think the picture is supposed to show much more open space. I have, I think, a much better picture in this Mesivta Gemara. Look how wide open the space is. You see,
That's how it looks in this
that picture, but not that, exactly. Beautiful, Adam. That it's, you see all that space, so those are not real walls. It's more open than space on all four sides. I really, you see that corner, and if you look in the English, like Anna pointed out, that picture on the bottom, it looks like a drain. See on 7b1 on the left corner, that drain that's the well. The well is down there, and you see the way how it curves, the corner curves. It's like an L. It's an amma. Each side is an amma by an amma on going this way, and an amma going that way. Okay, on each of the four corners. Is that clear? It's going two different directions. Right, but really it's an amma going this way, an amma going that way, and the rabbi said that is good. That's considered on a Torah level a private domain, and the rabbis allowed you. Meaning, obviously, if it wouldn't be for such a reason, because the people needed the water on Shabbat of going to the Rega, they would not allow you. They would not say that's sufficient enough, at least on a rabbinic level, to carry, go inside that, to say that's a private domain, because it's open on, you see that space is on all four sides, but they allowed it to the people of the Rega. They said you can rely on obviously biblically on a Torah level, if this is considered a private domain. You have four corners, and you have posts at all four corners, and each post is a certain size, and that's, by the way, you mentioned about a tefach. There's a Tosfos earlier that Tosfos says that maybe the rabbis were more strict when it comes to Shabbat, that they required an amma on each of those sides. But regarding other areas, they might be more lenient. They might say a tefach. When it comes to Shabbat, they were more strict, and they required an amma. So that is considered a private. That is considered a private domain. Okay. So the Gemara says. So Rava said. So now, since on Shabbat that's considered a private domain, it's considered, and so therefore the rabbis. So therefore, comes Rabbi and says, if you put schach on top of that. If you put schach on top of that pasi biro, you put schach on top of this well, and on top of the four corners, right? You have those four corners over there in your picture. To make believe, now you covered it up. You put a cover on top, like this picture. You see the cover, this cover on top. The well is over here, the four corners here, open space here. You put the schach on top. So now it's a kosher sukkah, even though where are the walls? You don't have proper walls. The walls are all open over here. It's only have the walls, the whole size of the wall is an amma. There's a whole space of the. What we say, but if it's considered private property for Shabbat, the Shabbat. So on Shabbat of Sukkot, you could go ahead and what? It's considered a kosher sukkah on the Shabbat of Sukkah. Is that clear, Adam? Okay. So the Gemara continues. Mitzricha. We need Rabbah to teach us all these three laws. Rabbah teaches us three different cases. He teaches three halachot. Good morning, Simon. And the Gemara says that there's a need for Rabbah to teach us each one, and we will not be able to learn out one halacha from the other. Now the Gemara explains. The Iash Me'inon Mavui, if we will go ahead and tell us the case of Mavui, that it works, that if you put Succah on top of the Mavui, that alleyway, it had parallel walls. And you had a third wall that was a lechik. Excuse me, you put this little board, amen, on this, that you could put, and you put Succah on top of it. That it's good. If you would tell me that it's kosher over there, I would say that the reason why it's kosher over there is mishum the ika shtei defanot maliata. There are two good walls. Because remember, the case of the alleyway is there's two parallel walls that were perfect walls, full-size walls, not these corner walls that we had by the pit, by the well. These are two perfect walls. And then there was a third wall that was created, excuse me, by you put a board, a very thin board on the third wall. And it works for Shabbat. So since it works for Shabbat, so we're going to allow it to work for Sukkah because it has two excellent walls, right? You know, by Sukkah, we found that you need two walls, and the third wall could be a tefach wall. But those two walls that are used are good, perfect walls. The third wall is only as much as it will legally be considered a wall, even though it doesn't have the fullness of a regular wall. So if in the case by the pit when the case of the mavli, of the alleyway, when you have two beautiful walls going like this, parallel to each other, and you have a board on the third side. So even though the board is not a tefach line, but we'll say that since it works for Shabbat, it'll work for Sukkah. It has at least it has two good walls, so it can work. However, but when it comes to the pasi birot, which is the case by the well, that the rabbi said that you could take the water from the well, which is private property, and bring it to the top of the well, which was public property. You're not allowed to go from private property, now to carry on Shabbat from private to public. But the rabbi says if you place in the corners surrounding the well area, you place these boards, and each board is one amma this way and one amma that way. So you have two boards here, two boards here, two boards here, two boards here, for a total of 8 boards, but you have all the space in between. You don't have one proper wall, right? Simon, if you look at this picture, if you see this picture, there's not one wall going in a full length, just corners. You created 4 corners, like you put four each pole was an amma this way, amma that way. So you might not think that would be sufficient for a sukkah. You might not think that would work for sukkah. Therefore, Rabbah needs to tell us that since it works for Shabbat, it also will work for what? For sukkah on the Shabbat of sukkah. It would work. That's the chidush. Okay. Even when you don't even have one kosher wall, that would be considered a kosher wall. Since it works for Shabbat, it will work for Sukkah. So the Gemara says, "V'yashmina pasi barot." That on the Shabbat of Sukkah, it's considered a kosher Sukkah. This area that you place these 4 corners, these 4, double boards, we'll call double boards at each corner. If it's good on the Shabbat of Sukkah, so certainly when you have 2 good walls, and the third wall is a lechi, is a board that's less than a tefach, but since you have 2 good walls, definitely, and if it works for Shabbat, it definitely will work for what? Sukkah. So what do you need to tell me that case? If you could tell me the bigger chidush, you don't need to tell me the smaller thing. So that's the Gemara's question. The Gemara's question is, so why don't you just tell me that since you have this well, And you allow, if you put these four corners around the well, the area outside the well, you put a post here, and a post here, and a post here, and a post there, and each one is an amma by an amma. It works for Shabbat, and it works for Shabbat of Sukkah. And you can if you throw schach on top of these four corners, right? You threw schach on top of these four corners, like I showed you in this picture over here. The guy threw schach on top. It works, even though there's not one really good wall. Each wall is very, very narrow. You don't have one wall that's actually going across totally, right? So if it works over there, so certainly, good morning, Mr. Vitesh. Certainly, it should work in the case of the mavui. That on Shabbat, if you have two good, beautiful walls, there's a beautiful wall going all the way this way, a beautiful wall going all the way that way, and you have a third wall which is not a proper wall, but it's less, it's even less than a tefach, but it's board. But you say it works for Shabbat, it works for Sukkah, so you don't need to tell me it works for Sukkah, because certainly it's going to work for Sukkah, because if the well situation works for Sukkah. Well, you don't even have one good wall, so certainly the case when you have the alley, when we have two good walls, it definitely should work. The Gemara says not necessarily. The Ashmina Pasi Birod, we are on Mr. Bitesh, 7B1. Hevi Ashmina Pasi Birod, Mishum the Ika Shem Arba Defanot. You know, if you tell me that it works over there, there is you could say there's a name, there's four walls, there's four corners. You see over there, four corners. They put up a double board on each corner. Yeah, on the four corners outside the well. So then you'll say that's why it could work for Sukkah. But in the case when you have two parallel walls, and you throw schach on top, and the third wall is not even a tefach wide. The lek is shem arba defanot. There's not even, it has no resemblance of four walls. The emelo, I might think you would not extend the law of Shabbat to the law of Sukkah. And therefore you need to tell me, Vitesh, as we were learning last week, we said that certain things, that if it has a certain status for Shabbat, it will have a certain status for Sukkah. And we also said vice versa. Something that has a status for Sukkah will have a status for Shabbat, right? Remember we said that if two walls and a tefach, right? We said if you have two walls, if the walls go perpendicular, if the walls are like an L to each other on Sukkah, and you have a third wall, which is only a tefach, right? Only a tefach wide. And we said that works for Sukkah, right? The magic number we need for Sukkah to be a kosher Sukkah is 3 walls. That's the halacha. The question is, 2 of the walls have to be perfect walls. What's called a perfect wall? 10 tefachim high, certain height, a certain width, and it's a full width, the proper width, at least 4 tefachim, but it's a width. It's a wall that has the proper width, and we need 2 of those walls, 2 proper walls, and they go at a angle to each other, right? They're like this. Is that clear? Like an L. Not that the walls are here and one walls are here. They're next to each other like that, but not like this. They're like that. But the third wall we could get away with not having. Doesn't have to be a full. See, if you were to close it with a third wall like that, that would be considered a proper. You have 3 walls, but I don't have a third wall on the side that's that size. The third wall is, if you look at your pictures, you go back to your pictures that you have on. If you turn the page on Zion and Aleph 7a, right? If you look at the top right picture, all the way on the right. You see you have 2 walls, right? There's 2 walls next to each other. Adam, you see it, Mr. Bitesh, Simon, you see it on 7a. And the third wall is that little thing over there. You see the width of the third wall? It's very small. At least 10 tefachim. It has to have a certain, right. The height has to be the same. But the issue is the width. And the third wall doesn't have proper width. It only has a tefach. We say that's good. we said, and therefore, and then if you throw schach on top of that, let's say you lie the schach diagonally, that's called a kosher sukkah. And then Rabbah said, if it works for sukkah, then it's a kosher sukkah. So on the Shabbat of sukkah, let's say sukkah is today. That's going to be for a week, let's say. So today, it's a kosher sukkah. Come Shabbat, it's also kosher sukkah. And if it's a kosher sukkah for Shabbat, comes Rabbah and says, you can even carry 4 amot in that sukkah. It's called a private domain regarding the laws of Shabbat, even though on a regular Shabbat, that will not be called a private domain. If this would be in the street, you have a wall going this way and a wall going that way, and you have the third wall like that. That's not a private domain for Shabbat. We won't consider that an area that's considered enclosed, like your house. You can carry inside your house as much as you want inside your house. But Rabbah says that since on Sukkah, this structure is considered a private domain, it's considered a Sukkah, meaning it's considered a wall that these are considered 3 walls, but Sukkah requires 3 walls and Shabbat requires 3 walls. If it's considered 3 walls for Sukkah, on Shabbat of Sukkah, you could carry inside. It's considered a private domain. Okay? So now the Gemara says, V'iyash mi'inan hani tarti. If you tell me these 2 halachot, that if it meets the criteria for Shabbat, it will meet the criteria for Sukkah. If it's good enough for Shabbat, if this is considered a wall for Shabbat, if it's considered private area for Shabbat, it's considered an enclosed area for Sukkah, I would only know that you could go from something which was strict to something that you could apply a rule by something that's generally strict to create a leniency. I would say because you're going from strict to lenient, meaning if Shabbat, which is generally very strict, it's much stricter than Sukkah, right? Shabbat, if a guy violates Shabbat, carries with it the death penalty if he was warned and there are witnesses, right? It's a very serious thing. If a guy doesn't sin in a Sukkah, it's a serious sin. He didn't sin in the Sukkah, he violated an asay. Is a positive commandment that you have to, on the first night of Sukkah, you have to go into the Sukkah and eat. And every day of Sukkot, there's a positive commandment that if you plan on having a meal, right? If you plan on having bread and being satiated, if you plan on having a real meal, you're not allowed to eat the meal outside the Sukkah, right? Let's say if today would be Chol Hamoed, right? The intermediate days of the holiday. If I don't have a sandwich, if I have something, technically I might not need to go to the Sukkah because I'm not eating bread, I'm not having a meal. But if it's Chol Hamoed Sukkah, I'm at work and I want to have bread, I have to go to a Sukkah, right? So, but it's not the same level as Shabbat. So the Gemara said, Hani Tarti, if you tell me these 2 laws, that's because Mechmirta lekilta. Good morning, Mark.
Morning.
Morning. We could apply the rule that applies by something that's strict. If it's considered in something that's generally was strict, it's considered it meets the criteria, it's good enough, it's considered private for a strict halakha. So certainly it will apply the law for what? A lenient halakha. Therefore, if you tell me that it's good enough for Shabbat, if you throw schach on it, it will be good enough for Sukkah, I will not know that something that's good for Sukkah would be good enough for what? For Shabbat. To go from a situation which is more lenient, which is Sukkah, to go to something which is more strict, Amalo. I might say that we will not go ahead and apply the law that if it's good enough for Sukkah, it's a wall for Sukkah, right? We said that third, you have 2 good walls. They're perpendicular, they're adjacent to each other. The third wall, that tefach wall, which is only a tefach, it's good for Sukkah, and now we would not know that it's considered a third wall for Shabbat. For Shabbat, we would say that's not considered a what? A third wall. Therefore, Succah. That's why we need Rabbi to teach us that we extend the law that applies to Sukkah. Consider a wall for Sukkah, consider a wall for what? For Shabbat. And therefore, on the Shabbat of Sukkah, you could carry 4 amot, 6 to 8 feet. You can carry as much as within that area of that 2 walls, and that tefach is considered good enough for Shabbat. Since it meets the criteria of 3 walls for Sukkah, we're going to consider 3 walls also for what? For Shabbat. Okay, that ends that sugya. It was a very complex sugya, but we got into Eruvin and Shabbat walls and Sukkah walls and all different types of interesting stuff. Now we're going back to the meat and the potatoes of Sukkah. The meat and the potatoes of Sukkah was that this is a quote from the first Mishnah in the Masechta. The first Mishnah in the Masechta said that if there's more sun than shade, that's not called a kosher Sukkah. If you go into a Sukkah, if there's schach, if there's not sufficient schach, if the bamboo sticks that are on top, or the branches that are on top of a sukkah, again, branches that are not attached to a tree, because we said you can't use a tree that's attached. You can't make a sukkah under a tree. You have to be careful. Sometimes trees, branches grow over. There's a lot of halachic issues. Don't make a sukkah under a tree. But if you cut the branches, that kosher schach, right? But the question is, if the schach, if the covering does not provide sufficient shade, it's not considered a sukkah. A sukkah is, the word sukkah is like a covering. You need a proper covering. It's not a cover. You're not covered. You're not covered. Your blanket doesn't cover most of your body. You're not really, covered. That's maybe I would suggest people wear a talit. People shouldn't wear a talit like a scarf. It should cover the majority of your body, the talit, but I understand. It should be, it should be, you're covering yourself with a talit. You're wrapping yourself with it. That's that. So therefore, if you have too much sun, that's not considered, if there's more sun than shade, you're not considered covered. That's not a kosher sukkah. You have to have more shade than sun. Okay. Now the Gemara discusses where, if the sun comes through the top of the sukkah, if the sun comes through the schach, it means if you don't have sufficient schach, I understand that's considered not kosher. But what about if the sun comes through the walls? Let's say the reason why there's a lot of sun in the sukkah is, let's say you have sufficient schach, if you have proper coverage of the walls, but let's say the sun beams in through the walls. Let's say the materials that you use through the walls or type of materials that the sun comes right through. Or let's say we spoke about earlier, technically you can have spaces in the walls, as long as each space, you can make walls out of poles. As long as each space between each pole is less than 3 tvachim, let's say less than 9 inches, it's kosher for a wall. So you can have a lot, so there's a possibility you can have a lot of sunlight coming in through the walls. Would that sunlight, here's the question, Ariel, would that sunlight invalidate the sukkah? That's the question. So Simon shakes his head because Simon knows the halacha. Simon says that will not ruin the sukkah. It's a kosher wall. It's a kosher wall. So the fact that the sun comes in through that wall doesn't invalidate the sukkah. As long as you have proper coverage on top, that there's proper covering on top, that without the sun coming in from the side, you have more shade than sun as a result of your covering, you're covered. That's considered a kosher sukkah. So that's the issue here in the Gemara. Tana Rabbana, the rabbis taught, Chamata machmat hasichuch. the sun, that which the Mishnah stated, that the sun, having too much sun, more sun than shade, would ruin the sukkah, would invalidate the sukkah. It's only if the sun is coming in because there's not enough shade of the schach. Below machmat hadefanot. Not that if it's coming in because the walls, the sun is coming in through the walls. That does not invalidate the sukkah. However, Rabbi Yoshi Omer, this is a matter of dispute, the Gemara said. Rabbi Yoshi Omer, af machmat hadefanot. Even if the sun comes through the walls, it also would invalidate the sukkah. So he holds that he might not accept what we said before, that if you have these poles and you have that within, and there's spaces, and you stand up these poles, and they're 10 tefachim high, and there's spaces less than 9 inches between each pole. We said it's good because we said, good morning, Aaron. We said it's considered walls. He might say, hey, you know what? Depends how much sun is coming in. If it's not sealed, if the wall is not sealed properly, and the sun is coming in, that he holds that will invalidate the sukkah. Okay, so now he would be most probably the man that the Gemara is going to jump on his opinion first, because I think his opinion is the more novel opinion. His opinion is the more chidush, to say that if you don't have sufficient shade as a result of the walls of the sukkah, that will invalidate the sukkah. Because we always know, what is there? But Torah says about sukkot teishu shivat yamim. I want you to sit in a sukkah. A sukkah, we all know, it's something that it's something that you have a shade. It's something that's created for a shade, and that's about the top. That's above you. It's not the walls. So how does he know this idea that this issue is even the walls of the sukkah play a role regarding this halacha of whether if you have enough shade on top, you really have a proper coverage. Let's say the guy has beautiful covering on top of him, which schach is usually referring to a cover, and yet you can have the most beautiful coverage on you, beautiful schach, full schach. Imagine the guy has full schach running across, but he says, hey, it's not kosher. Why? Because you have too much sun coming into the sukkah, and now let's say there's more sun than shade. It's not kosher sukkah, even though you have walls, proper walls, and you have an amazing schach going across the sukkah. The top of the sukkah, he says it's not kosher. Where does he know this idea? So the Gemara says, the ksiv, in my time, the ksiv v'sakosa ala aron et haporochet. The pasuk says, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu that after you place the Aron HaKodesh, the holy ark, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the Holy of Holies, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you had in the Beit HaMikdash, you have the building of the Beit HaMikdash, or let's say we're talking about the Mishkan, the tabernacle, there was it had boards, and it had hangings and curtains, and you have in the middle, there was a curtain called the parochet, a curtain in the middle. And that separated between the Kodesh, the holy, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the holy holies. And on the other side of the curtain was where they put, all the way on the inside, they had the Aron HaKodesh, the holy ark, with the Luchot, with the Torah, and the Kohen Gadol only would enter there once a year on Yom Kippur. And the Torah says, after you place the Aron HaKodesh, the holy ark, in that area, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, then it says, I want you to place a parochet. I want you to place a curtain to separate between that area and the area outside of it. And the Torah uses, the language, I want you to place a curtain, it says, V'sakota al Aron et haparochet. You shall cover, use the language of schach on the Aron, the parochet. The curtain, now a curtain stands straight. It's a straight standing curtain. It's not a curtain you're throwing over the Aron HaKodesh. So you have the aron here, and you have this curtain over here, and this curtain is called a coverage. The Torah refers to this curtain, the mechitza, like the wall, the curtain, as a schach. So if the Torah refers to this as schach, so therefore we see that it has a similar laws as this cover. That if you call this a schach, so the same way this has to, the schach on top have to be more. It has to be the more schach than sun. So if we call this schach, so it has a similar law that this also plays a role in the coverage. So when the Torah says, I want you to stay in a sukkah, I want you to have coverage, I want you to have shade, it's the shade of the walls and the shade of the covering. And if you have holes in the wall, so to speak, or that the sun is coming through that, then you don't, that will invalidate your sukkah. So the Gemara says, "Hari porochet mechitza." Is a mechitza, is and the Torah calls this mechitza almo. So we see mechitza kischach bi. You can't have two more sun than shade. So this walls that you place on this side also have to fulfill that requirement. You can't have too much sun than shade. And therefore, if you're going to measure if you're going to look at this inside of the sukkah, and there's more sun than shade, even though you have beautiful coverage on top, a beautiful schach running all across the top, or more sun, more shade than sun from the top, but the walls also have to be a type of a schach of some sort. It has to have a certain. Say it again. Right, let's say the sun's coming where the fourth floor will be. So here, Rav Oshia says it's no good. Rav Oshia says that if you have to see, if it's too much sun, it will invalidate the sukkah. Right. Exactly. Exactly. According, he might not agree with that halacha. That we don't follow this. We say it's all about the top of the sukkah. It's all about what's the coverage on top. If you have more schach than if you have more shade than sun, based on your top, what you place on the top, that's good. We don't look at the coming through the side. I want to wish everyone a beautiful day. Now I'm going to be here tomorrow. I'm going to be doing recruitment. I'm going to Israel to meet students that go to Israel after high school, and then speak with them when they come back to the States. We got to set up some learning opportunities for them when they come back to the States. So I'm going to be here tomorrow, and we're going to figure out who's going to cover. Talking about coverage, we're going to figure out who's going to. Maybe Mark Ashley might be covering this year. We'll see who's going to be covering, and I'm going to try to make it very back fast. So I'm making it a very fast trip. To not to take away. I don't want to miss too many days from the class, everybody. So we're going to try to make it very fast. I'll be here tomorrow also. Yeah, we're going to try to have a class every day. We don't want to. And we're going to try to make sure that there'll be coverage.